Today, I want to talk about the atonement of Jesus Christ. This is a subject that, for me, has brought great comfort and has also been very difficult to learn. And I'm still learning about the atonement of Jesus Christ. President Nelson encouraged us to study the atonement of Jesus Christ every week for the rest of our lives. The atonement of Christ is the reason that we are able to return back to our Father in heaven. And when we talk about the atonement of Jesus Christ, we don't want to talk about it as something separate from Christ, because it is what he did. It's his sacrifice. It's Christ that allows us to come back to the presence of the Father through his sacrifice. But in calling it the atonement of Christ, it just helps us to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about Christ. The atonement of Christ undid many things that happened from the fall. So for example, Adam and Eve reached up and partook fruit from a tree, causing the fall. Christ, being the first fruits, was lifted up onto the cross, or lifted up onto a tree, as kind of that pain for that action that was done by Adam and Eve. Another, when Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, they were cursed with a couple different curses. One, they were cursed with death, both spiritual death and physical death. Their bodies would return to the dust of the earth. Christ, after he died, was put in the dust of the earth. He was put into a tomb in the earth and was resurrected 3 days later. So Christ paid for that punishment that was given to Adam and Eve, and therefore given to all of us. The next one, Adam and Eve were cursed with thorns and thistles, that the ground would bring forth thorns and thistles as they worked it, as a punishment for their actions, or as a consequence of their actions. Christ, when he was put on the cross, was given a crown of thorns as punishment, to signify that he was the King of the Jews. Well, this crown of thorns is symbolic of the thistles and thorns that was cursed for Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were punished or given the consequences that it would be through their sweat that they would be able to provide for themselves. Christ, while in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweat great drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. His sweat, or his blood, paid for our sins, paid for the sins of Adam and Eve, and the consequences that came thereafter. Eve was cursed with pains and sorrows. Jesus Christ was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. As it says in Isaiah, Christ, being an eternal being, gave an eternal sacrifice for our sins. Our sins, any amount of sin, regardless of the sin, as an individual rejects the light of Christ, or rejects God, as they're rejecting that light, they're rejecting God. And as a consequence, they're not allowed to be in God's presence, because if you reject God, you can't be in his presence, as your own choice dictated that you rejected God. And you were disobedient to God's will. In order for us to come back into God's presence, an eternal being, or an eternal punishment, had to be paid for that eternal consequence. We couldn't pay for that ourselves. And so the consequence of our sins went to Christ, and he paid for them. Not only did he pay for our sins, but he felt and experienced our anguish and our pains and our sorrows. I couldn't say how he did it, only that he did do it. And as you go throughout life and you give your heart to Christ in your deepest and darkest moments, you can experience the joy of having Christ right there with you. And you can know for yourself that he is there waiting for you to turn to him for help, because he did it so that he can help us, so that he can succor us, so that he can lift us, so that he knows what we need as individuals to be able to grow and become like our Father in heaven, so that we can become like him. He did this because he loves us. And it is the love of Christ that is in and through all things. If you have any questions about the atonement of Christ, reach out, comment below. I'll do my best to answer. Thank you.